Hey, it's Thursday, January 28th, and you're watching The Great Lost Rewatch. Today we're watching the Season 5 episode, The Variable. It's a Dan-centric episode, and it's the 100th episode of Lost, so that's exciting. We go into Daniel's past, where we see him as a young boy playing the piano, and his mother comes in and says, "You are a great mind, and you have a destiny, and that is math and science." She stops the metronome and says, "How many times has the metronome ticked since you started playing music?" And Dan tells her that it's 864 beats, which is 108 times 8. So, the numbers. The next is a continuation of the scene from Confirmed Dead. As a continuation of that scene, Charles Widmore shows up and talks to Dan, says, the for crash of Oceanic Flight 815 actually didn't end up in the bottom of the water. They ended up on an island, and I want to put you on a freighter to that island because I need your mathematical skills, and because when you get to that island, it'll heal your mind, and because you're my son. Well, he doesn't say that out loud, but you can read it on his face. Eloise shows up and tells him that he has to go on that freighter to the island. Back on the island, Dan has showed up on the sub. He asked Miles to take him to Jack, and he asked Jack how they got there. How did they get to 1977? And Jack says, well, it was your mother. And Dan says, my mother was wrong. And then he promptly goes off to the Orchid, where we get the payoff from that first scene from this season where Dan is down in the Orchid station and bumps into Pierre Chang, and they talk about the future a little bit. Actually ends up going up to Pierre Chang later, saying, "I am from the future. In 6 hours, an incident is going to happen like this, but at the Swan Station that is 30 times greater than what just happened here." Sawyer's world is crumbling down around him, and he's deciding what they need to do. Should they commandeer the sub and go back to the United States and kind of just live life from 1977 on, or do they go back to the beach? Jen doesn't want to leave the island. Hurley thinks it's kind of silly that they just got back here. They shouldn't leave the island, so they've decided that they are going to go back to the beach. When Dan and Miles show up, and Dan says, "My mother's an other, and she can make this all right." Jack is willing to take Dan to the others with Kate's help because she was just there. She knows where the others are, so the three of them leave. Once they've kind of caught their breath, they get through the sonic fence, they stop for some water, and Dan says, "I was so busy thinking about the constants that I forgot that people are the variables. People are the variables. And I am going to change the future." He tells Jack and Kate that he is going to go get the hydrogen bomb and prevent the incident from ever happening. He's going to neutralize the pocket of electromagnetic energy so that the incident never happens, 815 never crashes to the island, and the freighter never comes back to the island, and Charlotte never dies. And I just want to point out, I know we haven't gotten to the incident yet, but we called Jack a jerk because he says that he wants to do the whole hydrogen bomb thing because he screwed things up with Kate and he wants to get her back. Dan is doing it for Charlotte. I mean, they both end up dying before it ends up happening, but Sawyer and Juliet are packing up their things when Radzinski shows up and says, the guy from Ann Arbor, the physicist, and two of the newbies just tried to shoot us, and they hear Phil in the closet, and they catch Phil in the closet, and they hold Sawyer and Juliet at gunpoint. Things are just going from bad to worse for Sawyer and Juliet here. Jack, Kate, and Dan make it to the others' camp. Dan just marches right on down there with gun out, holds Richard at gunpoint and says, "Where's Eloise Hawking? I need her to show me where the hydrogen bomb is that I told you guys to bury 23 years ago. If you don't tell me where she is in 3 seconds, I am going to shoot you. 1, 2, and then Dan gets shot. By whom? Eloise Hawking. He lays on the ground looking up at her and says, "You knew this was going to happen. You knew the whole time, and you sent me back here anyway." And she says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm your son." Thud. Lost. What I want to know is, why is the Swan site 30 times more electromagnetic-y than where the donkey wheel is? Wouldn't you think that is where the source of it all comes from? Like the donkey wheel? Alright, Leslie, I am going to catch my breath, and I'll see you tomorrow when you talk about Fall of the Leader. Bye.
We're going to need to watch that again.
And if you do the math, I think our 100th episode of The Great Lost Rewatch is going to be the incident, so hooray for that.